In the path of Irene at a Staten Island hospital today, doctors and nurses were in a race against time to do something difficult. Courageous people moving the very sick before the storm hits.
Ms. Ferrari, what have you told your healthcare providers at that hospital to do? Where will they be, the bulk of them, over the next several days? And where do you plan to ride out this storm?
Myself, we will be staying close to the situation. There is an evacuation order for the entire area south of Highland Boulevard in Staten Island. All homes will also be evacuated.
The impact of Irene was never seen as to what had been expected. However, it did cause the mayor of the city of New York, Mayor Michael Bloomberg, to order both campuses of Staten Island University Hospital to evacuate, bringing our staff together, practicing and exercising, tabletop exercising, to make sure that we're actually prepared. Now I'm going into this great detail because this is part of what helped us prepare.
This evening, you can see it swirling right over my shoulder here, what's being called a superstorm tonight. Hurricane Sandy is more than 200 miles off the coast.
This is an impressive, incredible cloud canopy. It is one of the largest, if not the largest, we've ever seen in the Atlantic hurricane bases.
There was definitely this point where we went from, oh, this is Irene, to this oh my gosh moment when you realize that this was different.
With hurricanes of this force, you know they're coming. They don't just jump up to you in one day. So my role was emergency management at that time as well. I was a co-chair of the Emergency Management Committee, and our job was to work with all our interior partners and all of our external partners to plan for Sandy. And that rollout started about 7 to 8 days before.
One way or another, you're putting him into an ambulance in the next 3 minutes.
For any hospital, we really go through a process through the HICS system, Hospital Emergency Incident Command System, whereby we prepare for just such emergencies.
Before the storm hit, it was more about communication. The hospital's command center was activated in preparation for the storm.
Mayor Bloomberg was very cautious, and he ordered us to shelter in place. This was a very different experience. And as we all know, Sandy itself turned out to be a very different experience.
All night long, Sandy marches up the East Coast, practically parallel, more than 200 miles offshore. It will collide with an Arctic front coming in from the west, throwing a new dose of energy into the storm and expanding its already monster size and reach. Then inject the 150-mile-an-hour plus winds of the jet stream. And forecasters think Sandy explodes into a superstorm.
So we had a multi-agency, multidisciplinary committee that planned our response to what we expected Sandy to be.
In the command center, we took a look at the logistics, we took a look at the organization, the administration, we took a look at patient safety. Utilities was a large part, even the finances of how we would function during an extended period of time where we may be cut off from the rest of the world. We made sure that we had generators in place that would function in the event that we were to lose power, and that proved to be true. We were also concerned by the fact that all of our infrastructure, meaning our utilities, were below ground, and that water could easily seep into the basement of the hospital and hit our own power sources and cut us off from energy needed to take and protect our patients, store food, and other possibilities. All of that was taken care of and was handled by the work done by the many people who were assigned in leadership roles in the command center who had a certain type of expertise in dealing with just such emergencies.
And I really had even more respect for the colleagues at Staten Island University Hospital when I saw the seriousness and the professionalism and the painstaking planning that actually went into preparing for this storm and the communication. It was just amazing to see so many different people that had so many different roles interacting with one another almost in unison in such a collegial, professional way. And it gave you that confidence as a community member that these people really care and they're good at what they do.
Emergency officials up and down the East Coast are warning people that you can't wait. You have to get your emergency kits and emergency plans in place now.
So we made a decision, and the state government made a decision not to evacuate our patients. We didn't live by that rule. We did our own internal assessment, once again with the help of Northwell's emergency management team, on who we thought we should transfer out of the hospital prior to Sandy. We felt that if we lost power and we had to mechanically ventilate people, that means using your hands to ventilate people, we would put them at high risk for severe injury and even death. So we transferred all of those patients, vented and neonatal ICU, to our Northwell partner hospitals.
The emergency department in general is very well prepared for any emergencies, big or small. We are lucky enough to have a robust system that helps us with emergency preparedness and provides action plans.
Leading up to Superstorm Sandy, there were a lot of things that had actually gone into it, and frankly, it is something that we had been working on for a couple of years before. In 2004, when I came to SIUH as the director of emergency medicine, was to revamp all of the disaster management protocols and to look at the big ones. And interestingly enough, the first one we decided to do was actually about flooding. And we came up with this protocol where there was a lead on site and a lead off site, something that we still use to this day.
As far as supplies like medical supplies, we were prepared, and part of our planning was to overstock, and we overstocked for up to 7 days on all medical items.
So I was on the island the night before. Interestingly enough, it was relatively calm, what I remember.
On the night of Sandy, like many other Staten Islanders, I was home preparing for the storm. I did have property in the flood zone, and I spent most of the night trying to mitigate, unfortunately, inevitable damage to my house. So I think that's much like many of people that lived on Staten Island.
During Sandy, I actually had two roles. I was just wrapping up my career in the New York State Assembly to be that December, and I was hired by Staten Island University Hospital, embarking on a new career. Watching my term end, the landing gear was on, so I thought. And then all of a sudden, the news started coming that our region was going to be hit with this major storm. So the landing gear did not go on, and we had to go back up. But also I had my responsibilities at the hospital as well.
And look at this picture tonight. This is from space, from NASA. It's a massive storm, 1,000 miles across. And long before it makes landfall sometime tomorrow night, it is already being felt tonight all along the coastline. Whipping winds and rains have already flooded many communities beyond the coastline. And the number of Americans impacted by this storm will be enormous. 60 million people, really anyone east of the Mississippi, will be affected. Hundreds of thousands have already been evacuated tonight.
You know, when you come into work, your goal is to go home at the end of your shift. And in this instance, not only did you want to get home for the sake of finishing your shift, but most of the people who work at our hospital are residents and were concerned for their families, and both, their own and their extended family. So just further heightened the anxiety that people were feeling. So not only managing staff from the perspective of caring for our patients, but managing staff and the anxieties that they were feeling personally.
People were volunteering for these shifts. This wasn't one of these situations where we had to beg people to stay. I remember when I went to the docs and the nurses and said, well, we're not going to volunteer anyone for these shifts. We would prefer that you tell us who wants to work, and as long as we can get to the appropriate number, we're not going to make a schedule. You give us the schedule. And we actually had to tell a couple of people who volunteered to work that we didn't need them.
We happened to have built two hospitals within blocks of the Atlantic Ocean. So we were basically running two command centers on two campuses, both located in harm's way of Superstorm Sandy.
I think the sense of anticipation on what the storm was going to bring, and the consistency in which we were, checking the weather, following the weather, getting updates from the command center locally as well as at the system level.
So despite the scariness of this impending storm coming, to see how calmly the professionals at Staten Island University Hospital were preparing and setting up that command center so that they would be able to support our community the best that they could.
There were so many points where you realized how tied to the community Staten Island University Hospital actually is. And there's so many points where you realized how many vulnerable people there are in our community that truly need help and that we can be there for.
We'll identify the challenges that we have and anticipate the need and get it in the house proactively as opposed to reactively.
Yeah, but it's coming. You're saying go over the medium. Oh shit. Relax. You gotta get the out of here.
I was home. I was actually working on some schoolwork at the time, and my husband said the water was coming, and I kind of thought he was exaggerating, so I went to get 2 towels to put in front of our door because the year before nothing happened, so I anticipated the same thing. By the time I went from the back of my house to the front, the water was already up to my knee.
As we were sitting in the command center at the hospital, which is in a boardroom overlooking Seaview Avenue, I looked out the window, and as the storm continued to increase and the rain and the wind became harder and harder, I looked out onto Seaview Avenue and saw virtually a river where a street once existed.
We were all up in the command center awaiting, word that Sandy was going to make landfall. And basically what Sandy turned into was 2 giant waves. And what I equated to, if this was during the day, when you saw that tsunami hit Thailand and you saw the wave come in and then the wave came out and took everything with it, if Sandy occurred during the day here in New York City, you would have saw a very similar event. We were hit by 2 35-foot waves in succession. And what that did is it just wreaked devastation, along the whole rim of where Sandy hit.
So I grabbed the dogs and we ran upstairs to the 2nd floor, and within minutes the water was already up to our bedrooms, 2 steps before the top, and we didn't think it was gonna stop. So we pulled down the attic stairs and we waited there until the next day, about 4 o'clock. We actually were rescued by the fire department.
And then, honestly, for me, the moment was watching the trucks pass the hospital at the line of the water. The fire department had set up the system where they actually had these giant fire trucks that were essentially at the lead edge of the water, letting people know that if you were left to the back of the truck, that they were no longer potentially going to be able to get to you if you needed rescue. That was what it signified to the population. So the moment when the truck passed by, there was definitely this realization that this is serious. When you could no longer see the truck, where the truck was now past the point where you could even recognize the lights of the fire truck, and this is even being up on a higher floor, there was definitely this moment of, uh-oh, did we do everything that we possibly could? And as much as we'd prepared, as much as we'd gone through the process, there was still this fear of the unknown and what was actually going to happen. And for me, it was all about the lights of the fire truck.